I believe that you can find something good if you look hard enough. There's a silver lining in every cloud. And you got to focus on the positive, not the negative. You know, you can be negative if you want to be, but it's not going to help you any. But if you're positive, it's amazing what it can do for the whole situation. And God can work through positive situations. Think about my dad. You know, my dad died 9 years ago. I had never had anybody close to me die. My dad was my best friend and my biggest supporter. So we didn't have any warning. Right in the middle of the night, he died in his sleep. We're not quite sure what happened, whether it was a heart attack or a stroke. And I mean, that morning, my mom and I were devastated. Here's my dad, you know, 1 minute we had him, the next minute, he's gone. And I mean, I hardly ever cry. But I sobbed and I wept as I lost my dad. Well, it was really hard. I was thrown into the grieving process. And if you've lost anybody, and many of you have, you know, some of you are widows, and some of you have even lost children, it is the hardest thing to go through, the loss of somebody that you love. Well, it took a while, and, you know, I grieved well. And now as I look back on it, I see people that are in nursing homes, that are in hospitals, that have suffered strokes, that are going through all kinds of hard things. And you know what? I may have lost my dad, but you know what the positive thing is? He didn't suffer. I mean, he's in a better place. He went right to God. And that so comforts me. You know, maybe you've lost your health, or losing your sight, or losing your mobility, or losing your hair, or whatever it is. You know, we're not as young as we used to be. And part of life and maturing, you have to grapple with this, and you have to cope with this. So we lose things, but there's always something positive. I want to talk about, as you go through loss, with any loss, there's a kaleidoscope of feelings. You know, I've done some studying about grieving, the grieving process. And oftentimes people will come up to my book table and they'll say, Father, do you have anything on grieving? I just lost somebody. I lost a son. I lost a daughter. I lost a husband. And I want to know how to grieve. And I have to tell you, you know, with grieving, whenever you lose anything, there's going to be a grief process. I play golf. You know, I'll be out there on a golf course and I'll hit my ball into the woods and I'll lose my ball. And I'll go through a grieving process. You know, the first thing is, you know, shock that I hit it into the woods, and then anger, you know, where's that darn ball? And then, you know, you finally come to acceptance. And there's a whole process, whether it be a golf ball or your son or daughter, there's a whole process of grieving. The first stage is shock. Then you go through denial. Then, of course, there's bargaining with God. And then there's despondency or depression. Then there's anger. And then, hopefully, there comes acceptance. And there's a whole kaleidoscope of feelings. Whenever you lose something, whether it's a loved one or money or health, you go through a grieving process. And I want to tell you, allow yourself to feel. You know, oftentimes we're not taught to feel and to go through emotions. Well, the bottom line is, you know, we're feeling people and we do go through emotions. For example, do you know what the shortest verse in the Bible is? It's John 11. When Lazarus died, it says 2 words, Jesus wept. See, Jesus felt. He was human. He allowed himself to grieve. And there's a whole kaleidoscope of feelings when you go into the grieving process. Some people, like I said, express them. When my dad died, I sobbed. And I'm not a person who usually cries. But it was a healing moment for me because I had to let it out. And I remember when I had his funeral, I had a towel right there because I was afraid I'd lose it. Because I have much emotion. So allow yourself to grieve. Don't let anybody tell you what you should feel. You just feel what you feel. And some days are going to be better than others. Now, when you go through the grieving process, I always tell people, you know what? Grieve well. And what I mean by that is, feel what you feel, go through the stages, feel the anger, feel the loss, feel the emotion, the sadness, but move through those stages. Move through the bargaining, the anger, the despondency, the shock, and come to acceptance. I'll talk about that in a minute. So when I say grieve well, you know, you go through the stages. And everybody goes through them differently. And one thing you got to understand really quickly, it's not a linear line. You know, you get the shock, then you get the anger, and then you get the despondency, then you get the acceptance. It's not, a straight line. Oftentimes it's circular. You're shocked, you come to acceptance, then you're angry, and you come to acceptance. You go back and forth. So grief is a very strange process, and there's a kaleidoscope of feelings, and you've got to let yourself grieve well. And don't think that you're strange if you have all these feelings. Grieve well. And especially if you've lost a loved one, I pray for you. Grieve well. And then I want to tell you that time heals. When you lose something, I've discovered that time heals. For example, I remember, we had this cat. One of the things you can lose I didn't tell you about is your pet. Those of you who have dogs and cats, you love your animals. You love your pets. And when you lose them, it's like losing, your spouse. It can be hard. Well, we had this cat. His name was Precious. I don't know if you've ever seen a Maine Coon, but they're very beautiful cats. They look like raccoons. They have the stripes around the tail, and they even kind of walk like a raccoon with the hunchback. And we had him for 16 years as a part of the family. He was alive when Dad was around. And I called him the man of the family because now my mom lives alone down in Florida. She's 85, and I'd go visit my mom 3 or 4 times a year like I do, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. And whenever I'd leave, I'd say, okay, Precious, you're the man of the house, you're in charge, take care of Mom, So in a way, I really loved Precious. He was a great cat. Well, about 5-6 months ago, Mom calls me and she's crying. I go, Mom, what's wrong? Because she never cries. And she said, Precious is missing. I go, he'll come back. He always comes back. Well, he didn't come back. Apparently, he was 16 years old, and I guess that's the life term for a cat, and he went into the woods and he died. And it was really hard. I was really hurt by that because I loved that cat. And I put him in charge of the house. And I put him in charge of Mom. And I go, oh, great, now who's going to, my sister's down there, but, day by day, that cat took care of Mom. And Mom loved him. Well, I was devastated right after Precious died. And I've had pets before and lost pets, but it was really hard. But you know what? Here it is about 5-6 months later. And it still hurts, but it doesn't hurt as much. I've had time to grieve. I've had time to mourn. I've had time to go through the pain. And now, as time heals is what I'm saying. And give yourself time. And in the time, I believe that God will touch you and help you to move on. And one of the major points I want to tell you, when it comes to grieving, whatever loss you have, or whatever you've lost, you must, and this is the major part of the talk, I really want to look into the cameras, cling to God. Whatever you've lost something, cling to God. You know what cling wrap is? That's something that you put over your food. And when you put it on, it really clings to the food and you put it in the refrigerator. That's what the Bible says. Cling to God. Hold on to God. I talked to you about trust. There's probably no greater time when you need to trust as when you're going through a loss in your life. Because you don't understand it. It doesn't seem to make sense. So what you have to do is you have to trust with all your heart that God is at work in your loss. The person par excellence that has lost something in the Bible, Job. You've heard about Job. Here's this rich man. He's got this big family, all this livestock. There's a whole book in the Bible called Job. And he's got all this, and then it all gets taken away from him. His family, his livestock, his money, he gets boils, and his health is all taken away. And you know what his friend said to him? Job, curse God and die. And that's the attitude a lot of people have, when you're lost. Oh, isn't that terrible? You're really going through a hard time. You're probably never going to recover. You listen to that and you won't. You'll just stay stuck. His friend said, curse God and die. Well, I love what Job retorted. Instead of curse God and die, you know what Job said? He said, I know my Redeemer lives. That is so good. That's right from the Bible. I know my Redeemer lives. And why that's good is because, you know what? God didn't cause the loss, by the way. A lot of people are angry. That's one of the stages of grief. And they're angry at God. Why did God do this to me? God doesn't do it to you. It comes by being human. If anybody does it, it's Satan who tries to steal from you. God's the one who restores what the devil takes. And for example, God's not the one who does it. What you got to do is not be angry at God. God's the one who can help you. You've got to cling to God with all that you got. For example, I wanted to point out the cross here for a moment. A lot of people think that God sent Jesus to the cross. God did not send Jesus to the cross. Evil people, unjust people crucified Jesus. God it was who redeemed him. God it was who raised him from the dead. And it's the same in our life. I like to say that God writes straight with crooked lines. You know what that means? In the crooked lines in our life, the losses of our life, the sufferings of our life, the crooked lines, God writes straight. He brings redemption. He brings resurrection. He brings new life. So, for example, if you're going through a depression and you cling to God, you know what will happen? God will bring new life. If you're going through unemployment and you cling to God, God will bring new strength to keep trying. If you're going through grief because you've lost somebody that you love and you cling to God, God will bring you through the stages to acceptance so that you can cope with it. So cling to God. That is so important. Trust in God. I know my Redeemer lives. And whatever you're going through, know that God is there with you. Don't just live, live with passion.